Welcome to the Liberal Europe podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Silvestre, and thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And for this conversation, I'm very happy to be joined by Eloi Borgne. Eloi is a junior policy and research officer at the European Liberal Forum, so we're playing with house money, and is also the author of the ELF policy paper number 32, Gridlocked, Unleashing European Power. I have him on a podcast so that we go over the main thesis of the policy paper and how to develop a future-proof electric grid in the European Union. And after our main conversation, please stay to hear a little more about the path that Eloi made before I got him on the podcast. But now, with no further ado, I bring you Eloi Borgne. I'm here with Eloi Borgne. Eloi, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's get into it because you wrote a very interesting policy paper. I have it here with me. I can show it to Eloi. It says Gridlocked, Unleashing European Power. This is policy paper number 32. And this is not only very interesting, but very well written. Congratulations. Where you go into a very important need for the European Union, but you started in the most perfect way to get my attention as a Portuguese, because you do mention the Spain and Portugal blackout that we had that affected 55 million people over 12 hours. So let's get into it. You diagnosed a very important condition for when we're thinking about rapid decarbonization of Europe, which is congestion. So tell us a little bit what is then the rationale of this policy paper.
So essentially, you have to picture the energy transition like a relay race, where generation and demand of energy are already sprinting, basically, and the grid is still kind of tying its shoes. So when we talk about rapid decarbonization in Europe, the central structural risk isn't that wind turbines or solar panels won't be deployed. It's that the network which carries the electricity around won't be able to keep pace with this. Basically, a lot of cheap, clean electricity is being built quickly. EV charging and heat electrification are also accelerating, but the planning, the permitting, and building even of these transmission lines and distribution typically takes years. So there's a clear timing mismatch, and that creates a lot of queues for connection, local overloads, and even curtailment, which is quite painful, of renewable generation. A great practical example of this is the Netherlands, which I use as a case study in Gridlocked. So I was an intern at the International Energy Agency, and right before I left, I'd helped start the country report of the Netherlands. So I was already quite aware of the issue. And luckily with ELF, I was able to discuss with Sophie Herman's office, who is the Minister of Climate Policy and Green Growth, who also highlighted this as the key issue of the energy transition in the country. And so what I learned is that the Dutch rollout of renewables and electrification has been very fast and very visible, but several regions of the Netherlands already report transport capacity shortages and very long connection queues. I've put a map in the policy paper actually that indicates the different regions and the levels of congestion. But it means that the Netherlands basically is a warning sign and sort of a living experiment. If the grids don't speed up, other countries who are moving quickly on renewables will see similar issues. I'm thinking of Spain, for example, where the blackout, as you mentioned, happened. On top of the timing and capacity mismatch, there's definitely a regulatory drag. So with permitting, especially, because getting permits to build these lines can take many years. Appeals also multiply the delays, and planning is fragmented across jurisdictions. So as a result, the projects sit in connection queues or get built without really a clear route to dispatch. And so operators kind of have to manage these congested lines with very expensive redispatch and curtailment actions. So this costs a lot, and it shows up on the consumer bills, which explains why it explains partly why energy prices are so expensive in Europe at the moment.
That is one of the diagnoses that you do, which is that lack of speed of trying to get this to be upskilled and to be of the service for all of us. And actually, you have this really interesting sentence, which is if electricity is the lifeblood of the European continent, powering its every move, then the grid network, it's the veins that ensures the vital flow. So, with that first diagnose, let's go into solutions. You present innovative solutions and you actually have smart grids and digitalizations. And then you mentioned the permitting reform. But let's focus on one that I thought was really interesting, which is smart meters and the EU energy data spaces. Those two really caught my eye. So, please get into them.
Those two are also among my favorite potential solutions. But to sort of continue the body allegory of the grids, I think that the smart meters can sort of be seen as the grid's eyes, and the EU energy data space is more the nervous system that allows these eyes to talk to the brain and the rest of the body. Smart meters basically give nearly real-time visibility on household and business consumption. So not just these monthly bills, but detailed telemetry, basically, that can show when, for example, an electric vehicle is charging, when heat pumps are being used, and when the peaks of energy uses are forming around the country. That visibility is really worth a lot because it enables time of use tariffs, automated smart charging, and demand response programs that move load away from congested hours. So in practice, if a digital system operator can see that there's a cluster of charges, for example, EV charging, that will create an afternoon peak, it can use smart tariffs to shift that load, basically making it cheaper and faster than building a new whole conductor. Gridlocked, my paper really recommends a coordinated EU rollout with standards and consumer protection, of course, so smart meters can deliver this flexibility. So it would definitely help with the load, but it wouldn't magically clear congestion up. The data must really flow to the right actors in a very secure and standardized way. So there has to be protections, of course. And that's the role of the proposed EU energy data space. It would be a sort of controlled gateway for accessing the data, where digital system operators, for example, and consenting consumers can exchange their connection status in real time. So then they'll have, for example, congestion forecasts and real-time indications under privacy and competition safeguards. So when properly designed, that data space can let aggregators bid household flexibility into the local tenders. So it allows for flexibility with pricing, essentially. So I really emphasize careful scoping and governance in this because you can't collect everything everywhere and you need it to work with privacy and market power.
Very good. Is this something that it's been in any way already tested, some pilot study that has been applied? Can you tell us a little more about this, or is just this conceptual?
I mean, it has been tested in quite a few places. Mostly, I would say, I think in North America. I haven't gone into detail into specific cases, but it's definitely been proven as something that works. And I think I remember something with a statistic, how in America there would be 90% of rollout by 2030.
Okay.
I would recommend our listeners to check, but I believe that that's a number that I read. And the International Energy Agency also pushes this technology quite heavily as something that works.
We have other interesting, innovative solutions to go to. One of them is very near and dear to me, which is cross-border interconnections. But the other one, and I'm going to take my privilege here as a host of saying that also I have done some work on this. It's renewable communities, which is something that we at the European Liberal Forum already also had a big focus. So tell us then how renewable energy communities could be a solution for this problem.
Yes. So in my opinion, energy communities is the best solution, or at least it's my personal favorite. Energy communities are also a way of providing flexibility, just like the smart meters and the EU energy data space. Energy communities is a more social counterpart, I would say, to these. To our listeners, essentially, an energy community is a group of people or organizations that can collectively produce, share, and manage energy. Usually, it will be a renewable source like solar or wind. So essentially, it lets neighbors pull rooftop solar, buy a shared battery, for example, or coordinate even smart consumption using these smart meters. And because the ownership and benefits are local, the acceptance of these renewables, for example, rises. Because as we know, one of the big challenges of building renewables, especially in Western countries, is the local resistance, the not in my backyard, the NIMBY idea. So this energy community reduces NIMBY resistance and creates a political constituency for faster deployment of both distributed generation and the small-scale flexibility that eases the local grid strain. Legally, EU directives already recognize citizen and renewable energy communities, and my paper suggests targeted funding, technical guidance, and a real straightforward market access so communities can act as aggregators and help balance the resources without some insane bureaucracy or complexity as we sometimes have in the EU. There's also quite a resilient story, which sort of links back to your statement with the blackout. During outages, community batteries or these small grids, these microgrids, can sustain critical services and provide support to the larger grid. And so scaling flexibility in communities, it would require a whole package. So standardized procurement, clear remuneration for these services, cybersecurity, and of course, as with the smart meters, consumer protection. But the payoffs are big. There's a cheaper transition cost when you use these. There's fewer new lines of transmission in quite contested places, so the locals are happier, and a more resilient and locally owned energy future, essentially.
And we just had a podcast with our friend Daniel Lindvall where he mentioned exactly what you just described a minute ago, which is the not in my backyard and how to overcome that, in particular with wind power. There's a second layer of it, which is one, as you mentioned, which to make it independent, autonomous, not necessarily dependent on a grid. But also you can have the other way around, which is you can connect excess energy to the grid and with that help the electric system. The thing is then you will need those connections. You will need also to think about those entry points so that the renewable energy communities not only can sustain themselves, but also have a contribution to the general population. I don't know if you want to go into that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it definitely points to the fact that, energy communities is not necessarily a very long-term solution. It provides flexibility, but I think it doesn't replace the idea of reinforcing the grid itself, because as you're pointing out correctly, at the end of the day, you do have to connect to this main grid. And if there aren't the capabilities of using that energy appropriately, there is a risk of energy prices going up. And that's sort of the main issue of the EU, in my perspective at the moment, that EU energy prices are too high, mostly because of the grid, but also because of how we produce energy. And I think energy communities can certainly help and support the grid in that way, but does not replace long-term construction.
I really want to go into this new topic, which is an European Energy Union. I have some policy papers published on this. Iberia is an energy island. It's been considered to be an energy island for a long time now with the European Commission, and we know this. And we Iberians, but also you can think about the north of Europe or the south of Europe, the Mediterranean basin. We would like to share more energy with our friends from Central Europe and from the eastern part. However, we need connections for that. And there's a lot of projects of interest. There's a lot of discussion about connections. But again, it gets back to something you said a minute ago, which is we need more speed. We need more, not only planning, but execution. So let's finish with a positive note here, Eloi. Tell me that we're going to have a lot of cross-border connections. I really need to hear that.
Well, as you probably learned from the blackout, Spain and the Iberian Peninsula with Portugal, of course, have very little connection with the rest of the continent, and notably France. And this sort of weakness was really demonstrated during the blackout. So I also have a personal sort of stake in this blackout, I would say, because my parents live in Barcelona, so they were directly affected for multiple hours by this blackout. It sort of comforted me in the idea of that I chose the right topic to study in a way.
There you go.
But
making mom and dad proud of you.
Yeah, exactly. But so I would say that the interconnection with other member states is definitely a key missing link in the Iberian Peninsula. I read a few of the reports that were made after the blackout, notably by the Spanish government, but also by ENCO. And so they all highlight the fact that interconnections with other member states is a solution to these blackouts. It allows for support of the grid when it goes down, and it restarts the grid a lot faster. And the reason that the Spanish and Portuguese grids did come back online in the first place, I believe, was mainly because of the interconnections with France. So it's definitely something that is worth pushing, although it is, of course, quite complicated. Also because, well, coming from both sides, with Spain has a lot of renewable energy, very cheap. This can create tensions with France, which uses a very different energy mix in nuclear, as you know. So it's definitely,
I'm laughing, but I shouldn't, because, and you mentioned, and sorry to interrupt you, but you do mention, for example, the Netherlands, that it's political contentious. Dutch policy discussions often use the interconnections with Germany as a scapegoat for energy price. So this is not just between the Iberians and the French, is also, for example, extends from the Netherlands to Germany.
Yes, this is an issue, I think, not only in the energy sector in the European Union. Unfortunately, there's always going to be some rivalry, some competition between the member states. We have to try and use that to our advantage, I would say. But in the case of energy, it's often easy to blame another country for high energy prices because of this closeness that we have. And this Netherlands-Germany tension point, for example, was brought up by the minister's cabinet, Sophie Hermans, as one of the issues that they have in the Netherlands. So it is a risk for these interconnections to be used sort of as a scapegoat. But if you look at the case on the ground with the blackout, it is clearly a solution for these issues. So it allows for more flexibility and balance of the grid. And most of Europe is already completely interconnected. Of course, the Iberian Peninsula is a bit of an exception, but the rest of Europe has been interconnected for a while. A lot of the Baltic states have recently connected as well, and it hasn't created any huge issues in the grid. So I would definitely push to reinforce this energy union, especially in times like this, where who is providing us energy is often questioned. The recent deal with the US is sort of forcing us in a way to buy a lot of LNG from the US.
We'll see.
Yes, we'll see. We'll see indeed. But so I think now is the time to sort of come together as the European Union, and this sort of useless and senseless infighting between who has the cheapest electricity and who is willing to provide. We should really reinforce these links between the member states.
And it's not going to be a focus of today's conversation, because then there's Africa, the energy connections that we're developing with Africa. One quick follow-up on this. You mentioned priority corridors. Do you want to go a little bit into that?
I mean, priority corridors are definitely an interesting concept. I mean, yeah, it's linked to the interconnection, where the idea is basically to designate these priority corridors, so sort of like power highways in a way, for this cross-border capacity. And so you can give them an accelerated permitting track and clear political backing. So this sort of, in a way, resolves the issue of the tension between countries. And in my paper, I propose a one-stop EU permit route and strict caps on permitting timelines for projects of European significance, so they don't stall for a decade, for example, in appeals. And yeah, so it sort of addresses this issue of political and administrative congestion that parallels, in a way, the actual physical congestion on the ground. So yeah, it would be an interesting solution to sort of accelerate these interconnections.
Yes, and then because we also have to think about our friends from the Western Balkans.
Indeed.
It's a great policy paper. It's very informative, and it gives us very interesting and very important solutions. Eloi, as we are finishing for today, tell us a little bit then, how can people follow your work? What kind of publications do you think that people should follow? For people that want to know more about this, where would you point them to?
Yes. Well, firstly, I do want to give a small shout out to Wojtek, my colleague, who actually made the cover of the paper, which I don't know if you saw it, but I'm a big fan of it. And of course, shout out to my ELF team who helped me work on it, Marcia and Benjamin. But to come back to where we can find all our work is on the European Liberal Forum website. So you'll find not just my work, but the work of a lot of talented authors. Our host today also has written papers for us, so you can also see them there. And other than that, I would say on LinkedIn, I post all of my work. So if you drop a follow or a connection, I would be happy to answer any questions people have about this paper.
Very good. I'm going to put all the links on the podcast show notes for not only the paper, but for LinkedIn of Eloi. As a quick side note, you mentioned Wojtek that did the cover work for your policy paper. I thought it was Dr. Manhattan, because, the blue, from
I see the idea.
Watchmen.
Yeah, I mean, originally the character was red, but then, we shifted to match the colors of European Liberal Forum, and I definitely see the comparison now. I hadn't noticed, but it's a good idea.
Okay, this is one more reason for listeners to go and check out the policy paper. I've been talking with Eloi Borgne. He's the Junior Policy and Research Officer at the European Liberal Forum, the author of this really important policy paper. Eloi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What was the path that you took before I got you here on the podcast?
I've always been quite involved in energy. So I studied in the Netherlands mostly, and being a French person, it's quite rare, I would say. It was honestly very, very enjoyable. I would say the Dutch people are extremely welcoming and very international people. So I really had a great time there. So I studied in the University of Groningen. I did a bachelor in international and European law. And then I continued with a master in energy and climate law. Which was really a interesting experience because, as you know, in Groningen there used to be at least the gas fields. So there's quite an extensive energy infrastructure there still. And then I did an internship at the International Energy Agency in Paris, which was also really an enlightening experience because the people there are really good at what they do. So I truly learned a lot, and I worked on country reports mostly there. And then I did an internship at a lobbying firm in Brussels to kind of put my foot in the door, in so to speak, in Brussels, at Bolt BPI it was called. And now I'm a junior policy and research officer at the European Liberal Forum.
So tell us a little bit what someone like you in your position or other people listening to us, what paths can you see both in your career, but also in studying this field and working and writing about it?
I've definitely seen a great increase in attention in this field, specifically, energy, climate, and sustainability. A lot of it has to do with issues surrounding these topics. I'm thinking of it kind of felt like it started at the attack on the pipeline, on the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany. And it continued with the war where energy prices skyrocketed. It feels like climate policy has certainly taken a bit of a back seat to, for example, defense at the moment with the war going on, which I wrote a blog about it, but I feel quite strongly about because, in my opinion, the major issue that the EU and the world is facing is climate change. And so I definitely think it's very dangerous to forget about that. But luckily in the energy field, it's still quite strong. There's a strong push for renewables, strong push for nuclear, basically energy independence, which is often linked with energies that are less polluting, so non-fossil fuels, as most of these come from states that are not as reliable. If we look at oil, if we look at gas, and coal is the most polluting one of all. So we've already successfully pushed past that, and hopefully the EU and the world will push past oil and gas. But it's definitely not a one battle, I would say.
One last question then for you. Do you see yourself getting involved into the day-to-day politics of governing, or do you think that you can have a bigger effect by working more in the think tank academic environment?
I certainly don't rule out going in a more political direction, but I do think that at my age and my sort of experience level, I think I'm definitely more effective in the more policy think tank level because I know that I don't have years of experience in the field, and so I really want to firstly hone my skills, I think, before I present really and push my ideas on my own 2 feet, I would say.
Well, we'll be following your career very closely here on the podcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
This is all for now. I'll be back soon with more podcasts. You can always visit the website liberalforum.eu to know more about the activities of the European Liberal Forum. So until the next episode, let's keep making the world a better place.
You were listening to the Liberal Europe podcast by the European Liberal Forum. This podcast was co-financed by the European Parliament.